All right, nerds, let's get cracking. My name is Chad Walker. I'm going to be talking about smart strategies for securing big, stupid machines. Second time at SAINTCON, and it's still the case that about a fifth of you look like my stunt double. That's kind of cool. I spoke here years ago, and I need to retell this story. I told this story years ago. So Utah is an absolutely beautiful place. So I took this picture with my crappy flip phone at the time, sent it to my friends, and I said, check this out, this is like the view from my hotel room. And they're like, Chad, that is beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, what is it, like 30 seconds to get there? And they're like, are you talking about the Arby's? And I'm like, yeah, of course I'm talking about the Arby's. What am I gonna do with a mountain? I break a sweat and get winded if I go up an escalator. So anyway, amazing place. This is me. I won't elaborate too much, but I'll just say that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not any other organization. They'd all fire me for any of this. So, and then, yeah, that's about it. Also, I was a forklift operator for 6 years. So when it comes to the business of like supply chain and distribution centers and that kind of technology, it's visceral for me. So that's me. I'm going to be using the word OT or operational technology a lot. When it comes to this stuff, there's actually a ton of jargon and a ton of slang, and it actually is really important stuff to know if you're actually like deploying these systems. But when you're talking to a lay person, I just talk about OT, full stop. Everything else confuses folks. And what I'm talking about specifically is going to be big stupid machines. So these are like really massive conveyor belt systems that are in distribution centers, or maybe like giant industrial ovens that make like 1 billion loaves of bread a day or something like that. That's the kind of stuff I'm gonna be talking about. Not really gonna be focusing on like, you know, printers or meat slicers or scales or smaller stuff like that. Big and stupid. Okay, the agenda, gonna melt your face off. I'm gonna talk about, from a risk perspective, when it comes to enterprises thinking about this, we've been doing it wrong. I mean, every security person says that. I'm going to talk about some useful frameworks to reimagine how you think about this topic. I'm going to talk about some of the key playing pieces that are part of these big technology arrays and how you should think about their threat model. I'm going to talk about a couple silly tabletops that you should do, and I'll tell you why. And my goal is that you're going to return to your organization and literally be the smartest person in the room on this topic. That's my success criteria, so we'll see if I live up to the hype. Okay, let's talk about operational risk and how everybody has been wrong about everything forever. So we'll tell a story back in 2013. We all remember this one. I remember it because I was actually part of the security team at Target. You know, there was the big data security event, you know, all over the news. It was just embarrassing. It was a big setback. It sucked. It really sucked. But here's the thing. The organization figured out what they needed to do. They brought in a bunch of great people, they invested heavily, they became sort of an engineering powerhouse, built like a world-class security team, reset their relationship with their customer, and now they're doing great, right? So like, that's that story. Literally months after that, Target Canada shuttered all of their stores and closed down. So this is when, in the news, the big breach was still in the news, but like quietly, Target Canada went away. There was a bunch of business reasons for that, like business process breakdowns, logistical failures, but everything manifested as empty shelves. And empty shelves are the kiss of death in retail. If you think about this, you go to a store, you're trying to get something, it's not there, you're gonna go to another store. And maybe you're gonna realize like, hey, I like this new store. It's cleaner, it's closer, it's nicer. I'm just gonna go here from now. And now someone's lost a customer for life, right? That is what gets like retail stores shuttered and closed. When we talk about like existential threats to organizations, sometimes your operational risks like absolutely trounce your data breach risks, for sure. So that's the most important slide of the deck. You can all go home now, but let's elaborate on a future case. The Clorox incident, my heart goes out to these folks. That's gotta really suck right now. This is the same case where, you know, the organization has made all these investments in cost cutting and improving processes, and it was all like obliterated because they had a security event that impacted their operational capability, their ability to produce their stuff and put it on shelves. If you read their AK, which is like, it's rough. I mean, this one's gonna be expensive and painful for them, right? But there's really there's nothing about data loss. This is exclusively about operational risk and how painful it is. And I know a data-centric security model is still important for certain verticals. That's totally the case. But we can't have tunnel vision on that. That's pretty much all I'm trying to say here. Okay. So we're going to need some big, stupid frameworks to talk about securing these big, stupid machines. The first one is we got to reconsider our CIA triad. If you're thinking about operational risk, it's all A. It's literally all A. There's a tiny bit of I and a tiny bit of C in there. So for example, if you're at a big distribution center where you're fulfilling orders for customers, yeah, there's going to be maybe thousands or millions of customer records, or we're printing labels on boxes, right? That's going to have the customer data. So yeah, you do have some PII that you got to consider. And then with integrity, usually this is about business logic, honestly. So if I have a store and I'm trying to send them, they have refrigerator space for let's say 100 gallons of ice cream. If somebody can fat finger that and put a 0 on there, we're now sending them an entire public swimming pool full of diabetes, and what are they going to do? They're going to have to sell all this stuff really quick. So yeah, it's all about the A. The next one, when we think strategically about this problem set, this is also a very important slide. The big idea is you're trying to separate your IT and your OT networks and protect them from each other. If we think about any big ransomware scenario, it almost always begins on the enterprise IT network where somebody clicks on a fish or browses irresponsibly, and then it can pivot to other places in the network, right? So you're trying to avoid that outcome, usually via network segmentation. On the other hand, at the same time, you have vendors who support this technology, and they sometimes have to VPN and log in and manage stuff, do all that, right? Well, you want to make sure you're protecting yourself against a scenario where that third-party vendor, if they have a problem, if they're compromised, that they can't pivot to your IT network. So this should be your security budget for OT, full stop. Everything is about recovery. The rest you can pretend to do with prevention and detection. You can pretend. It should be all about recovery. You are count on this, you are going to get owned probably in 6 months. That's going to be your life. And you're going to wish that you invested in ways to recover quickly, to make an incident that might last 3 days or 3 weeks, last 3 hours. That's the strategy. That's your budget right there, full stop. And then lastly, it's really important, there's a lot of people who have done fantastic work on this topic and have published stuff, and some of it has aged well and some of it hasn't. But this is an absolutely fantastic foundation, this particular NIST documentation, or if you Google the Purdue model of ICS architecture, there's a lot of fantastic stuff out there. You're gonna find that some of it doesn't really, translate to your environment, but you're still gonna walk away with some awesome insight and ideas, even if it's not a one-to-one. Okay, we talked big picture. Now we're gonna be talking about the various parts that comprise a large OT system, in this case, either manufacturing or distribution. The big idea here, you're not gonna be able to defend everything, so you should not try. Period. You should focus on where are those choke points where you can really make a difference, where you can really reduce risk, and literally just cut your losses on the stuff you're not going to be able to defend. So we'll go through all these processes. I'm going to start actually with the process layer, which is the low layer of the Purdue model. So when I say process layer, I'm talking about the big machines that do the work. These are the big ovens that create the bread. These are the robot arms that build the cars. These are, so on and so forth, right? This is the process layer, and it's all machine language, and a lot of it is over, serial port or USB. A lot of it you'll just never, ever understand because you're not an expert in this space. And if you're at an organization where this is not your key practice, you're never gonna learn it, right? And if you're in a knife fight with bad guys in the process layer, it's already too late. You need to flash the entire facility, start over, it's done, right? So you should have no expectation in most enterprises of your security people being good in this space. If you need to, you can bring in experts from the outside, right? I am gonna give one case where there was some really great security testing done at the process layer. So years ago, I was recruited by a company and they said, Chad, we have robots and we need you to secure them. And I'm like, I dropped everything. I'm like, yeah, robots, dope, right? So I get to a facility and I see the robots. It's not a manufacturing facility, a distribution center. I'm introduced to the robots. It looks like this giant waterless aquarium, and inside of it, it has these little robots that look like lunch trays on roller skates. And my first thought was, man, the future is so lame. This sucks, right? Oh my God. But anyway, I got to defend these robots. That's my job, right? So I start, and it's a sorting machine, right? Like a conveyor belt puts things in, and all these little robots zip around and sort things and spit them out onto different carts that could be loaded on different trucks, right? It's awesome, but lame. So as I'm doing my security review and talking with the people who built this thing, we figure out that there's no encryption on the Zigbee protocol communication that happens between the mothership, the aquarium, and the little stupid robots, right? There's no encryption. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna note this, but I don't know what the risk is yet, right? So we're gonna bring in a tester to look at this because, yeah, we just said, please encrypt. And they were like, well, it's gonna be, that's gonna add another 4 weeks to test and figure out, and it's gonna slow down your deployment timeline. Are you sure? And we're like, well, let's figure it out. So we have an internal pen test team, and my buddy Jason, rest in peace, awesome guy, amazing tester. He goes to the facility, he gets his big wireless card, he learns everything about the Zigbee protocol, he starts banging away at this thing for an entire week. And then on day 5, he finally calls me, he's excited. He made one of the little robots move about 6 inches by himself, right? He injected packets, figured it out, made a robot move 6 inches. So he's like, cheering, we're super excited, high five, great moment, right? But then we got to start talking about, well, what's the actual risk with the enterprise? So the next week, we start chatting with each other. And I'm like, okay, well, let's figure this out. First of all, is this an entry point? Is this a wireless entry point into the larger facility? Could somebody in the parking lot see this communication, get on there, exploit the mothership, and then pivot to the rest of the facility? And he assured me, no, it's impossible. And for reasons I won't bore you with, but that was not a viable risk in this scenario. And I'm like, okay, well then next, what about, can somebody just inject packets all day and make this thing absolute chaos, make the robots ram into each other, or basically just DOS the system? And he said, no. In fact, the only way the robots were able to respond to me is when the machine was powered down. I'm like, powered down? The mothership was powered down, but the little robots still were receiving packets, right? So I'm like, okay, look, what is the risk? These things aren't gonna pop out and do Skynet and start attacking humans. It's not an entry point. So what is the risk? Finally, I talked to the safety guy at the plant, and I said, here's the situation. Dude was able to make a robot move 6 inches while the system was powered down. Do you care? And he's like, yes, I care. You absolutely 100% cannot allow this whatsoever, full stop. And I'm like, whoa, why? Well, he explains to me lockout tagout procedures on big machines, right? Lockout tagout is where you have a massive machine and you got to fix it, and you need ways to securely power it down and put a bunch of tags everywhere, because if a technician goes inside to repair it, you don't want any errant energy, or in this case, errant packets, activating and injuring somebody. And if you allow that willingly, you could literally go to jail. The fines are exorbitant, but you could literally go to jail. So, long story short, sometimes your process security issues, they're a very big deal. Okay, next, going up a layer. What are the things that talk to the robots? This is gonna be your PLCs and HMIs. Your PLCs translate computer language into machine language. Your HMIs translate human interaction into machine language, right? A lot of people get excited about hacking these, but it's because they're completely, utterly defenseless even when they're fully patched. Full stop. This is like picking a fight with an 8-year-old, right? Okay, great, they're insecure, let's move on, right? So where I think people should focus on is actually their inventory of these things, and then figure out where they are physically in the plant. The reason I say that is a lot of your PLCs and HMIs are literally designed to be modular, One is on the fritz, you pull it out, you go to the shelf, you put a new one in, and you're back, right? So like, yeah, we can try to secure the living crap out of them, but frankly, a lot of the stuff is just, it was built for an air-gapped environment, and a lot of them have like firmware that's vulnerable, or backdoors, or test accounts that they never got rid of when they upgraded the version. They're just bad news. So that's my thought on that. Funny story, actually, before I go to that PLC picture, that specific model had a 10 out of 10 remote code execution vulnerability, okay? And the fix for this, the patch, was to physically turn that black toggle from run to program. That was how you patch this thing, right? So IT can't do it, you need people in the field to do it. Let me tell you a story about that, I'm gonna try to not laugh. So we have a couple of these things. So I contact facilities. I'm like, guys, we got 2 PLCs that are real bad news. We got to get these things fixed, right? This is years ago before I knew more about this stuff, right? And they're like, okay, we're on it. We're going to go find these things. So, sorry, 12 hours later, you know, these poor technicians, probably like covered in dust. They have the black lung from breathing in all this dust because they're crawling over this facility. It like, probably need tetanus shots. The facility is like 3 times the size of a football field, and it literally has miles of conveyors belt along the ceiling. So they had to crawl around and find these things and turn that toggle to patch it, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. They're like, well, we only found one. We haven't found the other one yet. I'm like, sorry guys, you got to find the other one. They do. I get an email overnight. They found it. And the other one was actually part of a standalone beverage sorting system that wasn't even attached to the network at all. There was absolutely no risk whatsoever of remote code execution, and I made these poor guys do this thing. So I should have been fired for that. Anyway, I'm doing okay on time, actually, cool. So next, we talked about the process layer, the robots, and then we talked about the PLC HMI layer that is talking to robots. Now we're going to be talking about the things that talk to both IT and OT, okay? So when we think about threat model for the data historian, so these are machines where somebody is watching what's happening, how many boxes per hour are moving, you know? Or sometimes there's diagnostics on how much vibration on the conveyor belt, because that can tell you when you maybe have to start replacing mechanical parts, right? And sometimes data historians do have like a emergency kill switch to turn everything off or whatever. But unlike the PLCs and HMIs I just talked about, let's talk about the threat model for a second. You see that this dude sitting here, he's basically has a desktop experience. So looking at the PLC and the HMI, you're not going to have people checking their email on this. You're not going to have people responsible browsing, right? The only way, hopefully you don't have these things on the internet, the only way these things are actually going to be compromised if somebody is already in their network and they're moving laterally, right? Things are different with the data historian. You now have not only a technician who is using this and has a desktop experience and can do whatever, check emails and, you know, bad behavior, but also in these facilities, sometimes you have workers who will want to play on the computer. The reason is they can't bring their phone onto the floor, right? You don't want to be playing on TikTok and then suddenly you get impaled by a forklift, right? You're not paying attention. This is a safety concern. They can't have their phones on the floor, so maybe they'll just play with whatever's available. I know I have a nervous breakdown if I can't check my email every 10 minutes. The next item, security guards too, right? These places have security guards, and that's the most boring job ever. I did that for years. And they're also going to want to play on these things. So we really do have to consider the data historian as something we really, really need to harden and be careful about. The next item in this layer is basically going to be your message queues. So this is how you decouple your IT from your OT. Your order management system says, I want you to pick 1,000 orders and put them on these trucks and send them to these stores. It'll send that to the message queue, and then your OT system will reach into the message queue, pick up that order, and then tell all the robots to do all the work, or the workers to do the work, pick the orders, etc. When I think about this layer, I really think about, this is where you need to think about network segmentation. Now, this is just a very crude example. This is not authoritative. This may not make your organization or your network, but it's just meant to demonstrate the idea that you may have an automation DMZ where you put all the things where both your IT and your OT have to talk to each other, but then they can't traverse, right? Stuff that is going from the IT network to the DMZ, it can't keep pivoting to your OT network, et cetera, and then the opposite. And then lastly, I'm not going to elaborate too much, but a lot of the organizations have what are called order management systems or warehouse management systems. We can talk a lot about, OT and that kind of technology getting bricked and you having like a major outage or whatever. But the thing is, if your order management systems are not pushing work to your distribution centers or your manufacturing plants, you've been effectively DOS. Like no work is happening. The only way work can happen when these systems go down is a bunch of manual processes where you have a bunch of analysts that are sending like spreadsheets over and telling people to pick things. You can do it, but it's painful, it's expensive, it's slow. You're gonna be paying massive overtime to employees and bringing in a bunch of contract help to move everything. It's gonna be a nightmare. So these technologies, they don't have compliance data, they don't have sensitive data, they don't have PII, and a lot of us don't care because of that. But this is literally the organizational heartbeat, full stop. If these systems go down, you're hosed. So my only suggestion here would be to, when you're talking with your executives, kind of elevate the prominence of these things. All right, last part, big stupid attacks for the big stupid machines. These are silly, but trust me, like there's a reason that I put these together. So the first attack that I invented is called the big gulp attack. You go to 7-Eleven, you buy a big gulp, like the biggest one you can find. You go to a plant, you find a PLC, and you pour your big gulp on the PLC. Now you're looking at me and you're like, Chad, that's stupid. And I'm like, you're right. Here's the thing though. I talked earlier about this idea of the inventory of PLCs and the ability to recover quickly, the ability to go to a shelf, grab a new one, and replace the one that's on the fritz, right? In security land, we often talk about legacy or end-of-life technology, and we're like, that's bad because it's not supported and it's insecure and it's gonna be owned. It's like, yeah, that's bad, but you know what's worse? You can't find new parts, bro. Like you can't replace it. You can't go to Radio Shack and just buy another one. Chances are the company went out of business, so you're not gonna have a backup. Sometimes organizations literally have to go on eBay and hunt for the parts they need and hope they don't get outbid at the last second, right? So the reason I bring up this particular attack, this is your opportunity to have a conversation with the business side of either manufacturing or distribution. This starts the conversation about PLC inventory, kind of redundancy, recovery, and inventory. And their minds are going to be blown that you actually care about this stuff. But this is how you start building that relationship and talking about recovery, which I said should be like 90% of your effort, right? And then lastly, the I hate this job attack. And this one, there's a beverage theme to both of these. And this one, someone goes to the liquor store, they get absolutely blasted, right? And they work for like a vendor that supports automation technology. So it's like midnight, they're drunk, they log in and they start totally screwing with their customers' networks, having fun, right? They'll eventually get arrested or whatever, but they're just having a great time. Now it's certainly not impossible. It's not likely, but it's certainly not impossible, right? But the reason I bring up this attack, even though it seems like really elementary and dumb, is my question is, have you actually talked with your OT vendors about an outcome like this? Maybe it's not even a situation where one of their employees are bad, but maybe it's a situation where their network has been compromised, and now there's a bad guy that's on your segmented OT network. Have you talked with vendors about this? Like, what is your actual IRP? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're like, well, it's on their segment, so they manage it, but it's your outage. Like, so who's doing what? There's a lot of complicated questions that come up. So for example, have you talked to the vendor about if something like this happens, how fast can you recover? If you have vendors that are overseas, do they have people like onshore that are available? Or do they have to fly people in from Europe or something, right? And now your recovery time objective just adds 12 hours or something like that, right? And then what if that attack is originating from the vendor? In the stupid meme here, somebody, the hero is like, we disabled the vendor's VPN, we contain the attack. But then it's like, well, how is the vendor supposed to support you restoring the system? And it's like, well, I didn't think about that, right? Again, these aren't like really hard problems to solve, but you at least just have to have the conversation. So with that said, there's no dumb questions, there's only big stupid questions. It's Q&A time. Dope. All right then. Well, in the famous words of Jeb Bush, please clap. Thanks, SAINTCON.